Imagine waking up every morning to the sound of birds singing across rolling green hills. The first rays of sunlight stretch over endless fields of golden wheat, while a gentle breeze carries the scent of freshly cut hay. A weathered red barn stands proudly against the horizon, and an old oak tree watches over the farmhouse as it has for generations. To most people, it looks like a beautiful farm. But to one man, it is far more than land. It is the place where his great-grandfather built a life with nothing more than a horse, a wooden plow, and an impossible dream. Every fence post has a story. Every field carries memories. Every tree has witnessed laughter, hardship, celebrations, and loss. For over 100 years, this farm has survived wars, economic crashes, devastating storms, and changing seasons. But now, it faces its greatest threat. Not from nature, not from drought, not from disease. Its greatest enemy is a piece of paper, a contract. A contract offering millions of dollars to erase everything this family has spent 4 generations building. Everyone says the farmer should sign. Everyone says it's the smart decision. Everyone. Except him. Because some things cannot be measured in money. This is the story of Ethan Walker, the farmer who refused to sell his land. Long before highways connected nearby towns, long before giant tractors replaced horses, long before satellites guided modern farming equipment, there was only open prairie. Wild grass stretched as far as the eye could see. The winters were harsh, the summers were unforgiving, and survival depended entirely on hard work. In the spring of 1919, a young immigrant named William Walker arrived with little more than a small suitcase, a pocket watch inherited from his father, and a dream that seemed far larger than his circumstances. He had no wealth, no machinery, no guarantee of success, only determination. William purchased a neglected piece of land that most people considered worthless. The soil was rocky. Large tree stumps covered the fields. There were no buildings, no fences, no wells, just possibility hidden beneath years of neglect. Every sunrise marked the beginning of another exhausting day. He cleared trees by hand, pulled stubborn roots from the earth using horses, stacked heavy stones into boundary walls, cut timber to build a small cabin. Then, season after season, he slowly transformed wilderness into farmland. Neighbors often wondered why he worked so relentlessly. William always gave the same answer. "I'm not building this farm for myself. I'm building it for people I may never meet." Those people would one day become his children, his grandchildren, and eventually, his great-grandson, Ethan. As decades passed, the Walker family farm became more than a business. It became home. Every generation added something new. William's son built the iconic red barn that still stood proudly after nearly 80 years. His grandchildren planted rows of maple trees lining the long gravel driveway. Ethan's father installed modern irrigation systems, expanded the dairy operation, and introduced crop rotation long before it became common practice. Every improvement represented years of sacrifice. Family photographs filled the farmhouse walls. One showed William standing beside his first horse. Another captured children running through cornfields during harvest. There were Christmas dinners crowded around an old wooden table. Summer evenings spent repairing machinery together. Birthdays celebrated in the barn. Weddings held beneath the giant oak tree. Even funerals took place on the property, honoring family members who wished to remain forever connected to the land they loved. For the Walkers, the farm wasn't simply where they lived. It was who they were. Ethan grew up believing every child experienced mornings feeding calves before school. He thought everyone knew how to repair fences, drive tractors, stack hay bales, and recognize approaching storms simply by watching the clouds. His classroom wasn't limited to school. It extended across thousands of acres. His father taught him how healthy soil smelled after rain. His grandfather explained why earthworms were a farmer's greatest allies. His grandmother could identify dozens of wildflowers growing naturally along field edges. Each lesson came with a deeper message. Take care of the land, his grandfather often said, and one day the land will take care of you. Those words became Ethan's compass in life. He never imagined the day would come when keeping that promise would demand everything he had. The trouble didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, almost unnoticed. One difficult season became 2, then 3. Rainfall became less predictable. Winters lingered longer. Spring planting was delayed. Summer heat intensified. Crop yield slowly declined. At first, Ethan believed it was simply bad luck. Every farmer knows difficult years are part of the job, but these difficult years never seem to end. Fuel prices climbed. Fertilizer costs nearly doubled. Machinery repairs became increasingly expensive. Interest rates on farm loans continued rising. Meanwhile, grain prices remained frustratingly low. Each harvest brought less profit than the year before. To keep the farm running, Ethan borrowed money, then borrowed more. Each loan was meant to solve a temporary problem. Instead, the debt quietly grew into something much larger. Still, he refused to panic. He believed one excellent harvest could change everything. One good season, one fair market, one lucky break. That hope kept him moving forward, until the letter arrived. It came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a plain white envelope. No special markings, just another piece of mail among utility bills and seed catalogs. Ethan opened it while standing on the farmhouse porch. As he read the first paragraph, the color drained from his face. The bank was demanding immediate action. Unless a substantial payment was made within 90 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The farm his family had protected for more than a century could soon belong to someone else. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't know what to do. He folded the letter carefully, looked across the fields where generations of walkers had poured their sweat, dreams, and love into the soil. Then he whispered words no farmer ever wants to say aloud. I don't know if I can save you. The wind carried his voice across the silent fields. But the land, as it always had, simply waited. 3 days after the bank's letter arrived, another envelope appeared in Ethan's mailbox. Unlike the first, this one was thick, expensive, and carried the logo of a large real estate development company. Inside was a short letter. Mr. Ethan Walker, we understand your property is currently experiencing financial difficulties. Our company is prepared to purchase your land immediately for $23 million. The offer remains open for 30 days. Ethan stared at the number. $23 million was more money than anyone in his family had ever imagined. It could pay every debt, buy a beautiful home, provide financial security for the rest of his life. He read the letter again, then a third time. It wasn't a dream. It was real. But as he looked through the kitchen window toward the fields, something about the offer felt strangely heavy. He wasn't being asked to sell empty land. He was being asked to sell his family's history. A week later, Ethan agreed to meet the company's representative. His name was Richard Collins. He arrived in a polished black SUV wearing an expensive suit that looked completely out of place among muddy farm roads. Richard smiled confidently as he stepped onto the porch. Ethan, he said warmly, extending his hand, you have one of the most valuable properties in the county. Ethan offered a polite handshake. What exactly do you want with the farm? Richard pulled out a large map. He spread it across the hood of his vehicle. Colorful drawings covered the page. Shopping centers, luxury homes, a golf course, restaurants, hotels, artificial lakes. This area is growing rapidly, Richard explained. In 5 years, this will be the most desirable community in the region. He pointed toward Ethan's wheat fields. This section becomes a residential neighborhood. He moved his finger again. The old barn? That's where the shopping district goes. Then he smiled. You've done an excellent job preserving the land. But imagine what it could become. Ethan remained silent. To Richard, the farm represented opportunity. To Ethan, it represented memory. Neither man was truly looking at the same landscape. News travels quickly in rural communities. Within days, everyone knew about the offer. Some neighbors congratulated Ethan before he'd even made a decision. You'd be crazy not to take it. You'll never see another offer like that. You've worked hard enough. It's time to enjoy life. Even some members of his extended family believed selling was the sensible choice. His cousin Michael drove over one evening. They sat together on the farmhouse porch as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Ethan, Michael said gently, you can't carry the weight of 4 generations forever. I'm not trying to, Ethan replied. It feels like you are. Michael paused. Grandpa loved this farm. He also loved his family. If selling keeps you safe, maybe that's what he'd want. Ethan looked toward the old oak tree. He remembered climbing its branches as a child. He remembered his grandfather teaching him how to tie a swing from its strongest limb. He remembered promising that he'd always take care of the farm. Some promises become part of who you are. Breaking them isn't easy. Unable to sleep, Ethan wandered across the farm long after midnight. The moon cast a silver glow over the fields. Everything was quiet except the distant sound of crickets. He walked slowly, past the weathered barn, past the grain silos, past the old fence his father had rebuilt after a winter storm. Eventually, he reached the highest hill on the property. From there, he could see nearly the entire farm. Every field carried a memory. That meadow was where his parents celebrated their anniversary every summer. The creek was where he caught his first fish with his grandfather. The western pasture was where he learned to drive an old tractor at 12 years old. Near the barn stood the apple tree his mother planted the day he was born. He knelt and picked up a handful of soil. It crumbled gently through his fingers. Rich, dark, alive. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Land isn't something we own, Ethan. It's something we're trusted to protect. For the first time since the bank's letter arrived, he realized what frightened him most. It wasn't losing the money. It wasn't losing the house. It was becoming the first walker in more than a century to let the farm disappear. The following morning, Ethan entered the old machinery shed looking for spare parts. Hidden behind rusted equipment, he noticed an old wooden chest covered in dust. He had seen it many times growing up, but he'd never opened it. Inside were dozens of leather-bound journals. Each one belonged to a different generation of walkers. The oldest carried his great-grandfather William's name. Its pages had yellowed with age. Carefully, Ethan opened the first journal. The handwriting was neat but faded. April 3rd, 1921. Today I planted my first wheat crop. The neighbors say this land will never feed a family. Maybe they're right. But I believe every piece of land deserves someone willing to believe in it. Ethan continued reading. Page after page described droughts, floods, crop failures, harsh winters, financial struggles. Yet every entry ended with hope. Not once had William written about giving up. Near the back of the journal, one sentence caught Ethan's attention. If you're reading this many years from now, Remember this: a farmer's greatest crop is never wheat. It is courage. Ethan closed the journal slowly. Outside, the morning sun rose over the fields. For the first time in weeks, the burden on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. Maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't to sell the farm. Maybe the answer was to save it differently. But how? That question would lead Ethan on a journey that would transform not only his family farm, but inspire an entire farming community. The following Saturday, Ethan drove into town to purchase a few replacement parts for his aging tractor. Normally, he would have returned straight home, but something caught his attention. A banner outside the community center read, "Future Farming Workshop, building healthy farms for the next generation." Ethan almost kept walking. He didn't have time for workshops. He had bills to pay, a farm to save, and only a few weeks before the bank could begin foreclosure. Still, something told him to step inside. The room wasn't crowded. A handful of farmers sat quietly, coffee cups in hand, listening to an elderly speaker standing beside a projector screen. His name was Dr. Samuel Brooks. For over 40 years, Samuel had worked as an agronomist helping farms recover from drought, erosion, and declining soil health. But unlike many agricultural consultants, Samuel wasn't interested in selling expensive equipment or miracle products. Instead, he asked one simple question: what if the problem isn't your crops? The room fell silent. What if the real problem is the soil beneath them? Ethan leaned forward. For the next 2 hours, he listened more carefully than he had listened to anyone in years. Dr. Brooks held up 2 glass jars. One contained dry, pale soil that looked almost lifeless. The other was dark, rich, and full of tiny roots. "These may look similar," he said, "but one is alive." He explained that healthy soil is much more than dirt. It is an entire living ecosystem, billions of bacteria, miles of fungal networks, earthworms, insects, microorganisms too small for the human eye to see. Together they recycle nutrients, retain water, and feed crops naturally. When we damage the soil, Samuel explained, we're not just hurting plants, we're destroying an entire underground community. He showed photographs of farms that had nearly doubled their productivity, not by using more fertilizer but by rebuilding soil health. Cover crops protected the ground between growing seasons. Compost replaced part of the synthetic fertilizer. Crop diversity reduced disease. Trees planted along field edges slowed the wind and prevented erosion. Healthy soil absorbed rain instead of letting it wash away. It all sounded surprisingly simple, yet incredibly powerful. For the first time in months, Ethan felt hope. Back at the farm, Ethan spread his grandfather's journals across the kitchen table. Beside them lay pages of notes from Dr. Brooks's workshop. Something remarkable stood out. Although separated by nearly a century, the advice was almost identical. Protect the soil, respect nature, think long-term. His great-grandfather had practiced many of these ideas long before scientists gave them modern names. Ethan smiled. Maybe the future of farming wasn't entirely new. Maybe it was remembering what had almost been forgotten. The following morning he made a decision. He would stop chasing quick fixes. Instead, he would rebuild the farm from the ground up, literally. He sold an old pickup truck that had been sitting unused for years. He postponed purchasing a new tractor. Every remaining dollar went toward compost, cover crop seeds, fencing materials, and equipment needed to improve the soil. Friends thought he had lost his mind. "You need more production," one neighbor argued. "Not fewer crops," another shook his head. "You don't have time for experiments. The bank isn't going to wait." Maybe they were right. But Ethan knew something they didn't. Doing the same thing had already failed. If the farm was going to survive, everything had to change. Transformation rarely looks impressive in the beginning. In fact, it often looks like failure. Instead of planting every available acre with cash crops, Ethan devoted large sections of the farm to cover crops that he wouldn't even harvest. Neighbors drove past wondering what he was doing. Some laughed, others whispered, "He can't even afford to plant properly anymore." But beneath the surface, extraordinary things were happening. The roots of the cover crops loosened compacted soil. Organic matter slowly returned. Earthworms multiplied. Rainwater soaked deeper into the ground instead of running across the surface. For months, nothing dramatic happened above ground. The fields looked ordinary, sometimes even worse than before. There were days when Ethan questioned everything. The bank continued sending reminders. Bills continued arriving. The developer's offer still sat unopened in a drawer. Late one evening, exhausted from repairing fences, Ethan stood beside the old oak tree. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was approaching. Heavy rain began falling within minutes. Normally, Ethan dreaded storms. Too much rain often washed valuable topsoil away. But this time, something incredible happened. Instead of rushing across the fields, the water disappeared into the earth. The cover crops slowed the runoff. The compost-rich soil absorbed moisture like a giant sponge. Tiny streams that usually flooded remained calm. The farm was changing, not because of luck, but because the land was beginning to heal. Ethan knelt and pressed his hand into the wet soil. It felt different, softer, cooler, alive. For the first time since receiving the foreclosure notice, he smiled. Perhaps, just perhaps, the farm still had a future. He had survived the hardest season. Now came the moment that would test whether his faith had been well placed. Harvest was only weeks away, and everything depended on what happened next. By early autumn, the Walker farm looked different. Not dramatically, not from a distance, but anyone who had walked those fields for years could feel it. The soil was darker. The crops stood taller. The leaves carried a deeper shade of green. Even after weeks without rain, the plant showed fewer signs of stress than neighboring fields. When harvest season finally arrived, Ethan climbed into his old combine before sunrise. The engine rumbled to life just as the first golden light spread across the horizon. He whispered the same words his father always spoke before every harvest. "Let's see what the land has to say." As the combine rolled through the wheat, the grain tank began filling faster than Ethan had expected. At first, he assumed it was coincidence. One good section of the field, nothing more, but row after row, field after field, the numbers kept climbing. By midday, Ethan stopped the machine and checked the yield monitor again. He blinked, then checked it a second time. The harvest wasn't just better. It was the best the farm had produced in nearly 15 years. The restored soil had held on to moisture during the dry summer. The healthier root systems had produced stronger plants. Natural biological activity had improved nutrient availability. Everything Dr. Brooks had described, everything his great-grandfather had believed, was happening right before his eyes. Ethan climbed down from the combine and looked across the fields. For the first time in months, he laughed. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because hope had returned. 2 weeks later, Richard Collins returned. The same polished black SUV rolled slowly up the gravel driveway. This time, Ethan greeted him with a calm smile. Richard carried another folder. "I've spoken with my company," he said. They're willing to increase the offer. He named a figure even higher than before. It would change your life. Ethan looked across the fields. Workers were loading grain into trucks. Children from neighboring farms were helping stack hay. His elderly neighbor waved from across the fence. The farm was alive. Richard waited patiently. So, Ethan closed the folder without reading the final page. My great-grandfather used to say something. Richard raised an eyebrow. Land isn't something we're meant to own forever. We're simply its caretakers for a little while. Ethan smiled. I'm not selling. Richard sighed. You know, financially, this probably isn't the smartest decision. Maybe not, Ethan replied. But it's the right one. For the first time, Richard looked beyond the property value. He saw the old barn, the oak tree, the family photographs visible through the farmhouse window, and the people working together in the fields. Quietly, he nodded. I hope it works out. So do I. The SUV disappeared down the driveway. Neither man spoke another word. News spread quickly. Not about Ethan refusing to sell, about the harvest. Neighboring farmers began stopping by. Some wanted to see the cover crops. Others asked about compost. Several wanted to understand how soil could hold so much water after a dry summer. Ethan welcomed everyone. He didn't keep secrets. He walked them through the fields. He showed them earthworms beneath the mulch. He dug small holes to reveal deep, healthy roots. He explained how reducing soil disturbance had helped rebuild life underground. Dr. Brooks often joined the conversations. Soon, informal farm visits became organized field days. Agricultural students arrived from nearby colleges. Local newspapers wrote stories about the Walker farm. Even experienced farmers admitted they had underestimated the importance of healthy soil. One by one, neighboring farms began trying similar methods. Some planted cover crops for the first time. Others introduced crop rotation. Many reduced unnecessary tillage. Within a few years, the countryside itself began changing. Streams ran clearer. Birds returned to hedgerows. Pollinators became more common. Fields remained greener during dry spells. What had started as one farmer's desperate attempt to save his family farm had become a movement. One quiet winter evening, Ethan opened his great-grandfather William's journal once again. Hidden inside the back cover was a folded sheet of paper he had never noticed before. Carefully unfolding it, he discovered a handwritten note. There was no date, only a few carefully chosen words. To whoever walks these fields after me, you will face storms I never imagined. People will tell you that the easiest path is the wisest one. Sometimes they will be right. But never forget this: a farm is more than crops. It is a promise between generations. Protect the soil, protect your character, and the harvest will take care of itself. Ethan closed the journal. Outside, snow covered the sleeping fields. The land rested, preparing for another spring, just as it had for more than 100 years. People often believe farming is about producing food, but the greatest farmers know something deeper. They don't simply grow wheat, or corn, or vegetables. They grow hope. Every season begins with uncertainty. No farmer can control the weather. Markets rise and fall. Machines break. Storms arrive without warning. Yet every spring, farmers plant anyway, because farming has always been an act of faith. Faith that tiny seeds will become abundant harvests. Faith that hard work matters. Faith that tomorrow can be better than today. Ethan Walker never became the richest man in the county. He never built shopping centers. He never appeared on magazine covers. But he accomplished something far more meaningful. He honored the sacrifices of those who came before him. He left the land healthier than he found it, and he inspired countless others to believe that caring for the soil is one of the greatest investments anyone can make. That is the true wealth of a farmer, not measured in bank accounts, but in fertile fields, strong communities, and a legacy that continues growing long after the harvest is over. Some stories end with fortune, others end with fame. This one ends with a sunrise, another planting season, another chance to care for the land. As Ethan stood beside the old oak tree on the first morning of spring, he watched his young daughter scatter wildflower seeds along the edge of the fields. She looked up and smiled. "Do you think these will grow?" Ethan knelt beside her. "If we take care of the soil," he said softly, "the soil will take care of them." She nodded and pressed another handful of seeds into the earth. In that simple moment, Ethan realized something his great-grandfather had understood all along. The greatest inheritance is not the farm itself. It is the wisdom to protect it. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Story of the Soil, and join us for more remarkable stories of the people, places, and ideas that shape the world through agriculture. Until next time, remember this: every seed is a promise, every harvest is a lesson, and every farmer writes a story that begins beneath their feet.